Yo guys, and welcome back to another week of me building a self-tracking app in Svelte 5. And this week I spent majority of the time on building out the goal feature of the app, which I started working on at the end of last week as well. So now we have a pretty much working goal system. I can create goals like this, like a daily step goals. This is pretty much the most basic goal that we can have. So here we set a goal of 10,000 steps per day, and I can also switch between these days. For example, this day on this Friday, I took 11,000 goals, so this goal is here met. And this is then corresponding to how many steps I took for that day. If I were to go into the journal and edit and say that I instead took 8,000 steps, well, of course, this will update and propagate to the goal as well. So I spent a lot of time on this goal editor view and try to come up with a design that feels pretty comfortable and not too nested. So here we can add our conditions. I can add another condition, and currently we have comparison and goal met. So this is between two variables, and here we can have a sub goal, so to speak. So this goal is only met if another goal has been met. But yeah, we have a comparison goal here with a variable, an aggregate variable where we check the steps entity, and we just have these two fields. Yeah, and then we sum up all of these steps, sum up all of the daily steps, and we just say that we want our daily steps to be greater than 10,000. We can of course also have a weekly goals, and here I have a weekly goal of my income. So I want my income to be greater than or equal to 2,000 each week. So if I save this, we can see that, yeah, I didn't make that much money this week. I think I only have made, in fact, 588, but I can set this to 2,000, and now we can see that that works. And this of course works for this whole week. So if I go back here in time, then that counts as this current week. But if I were to go into the previous week, we can see that for that week I made 0 money. So it's only met for that week that I'm currently viewing up here. We can also create some more complex goals like this. So we can have comparison and another dynamic value with a calculation instead. So if we add our income here, so our income value, so let's just call this income, and then we'll do minus our expenses. So I can select expense here, and yeah, and if I save that, we want this to be greater than let's actually say a constant. So we want our income, or our result, so to speak, to be greater than 2,000. And let's do that for a range. So we can also have ranged time scopes. So until, let's say 23rd. So if I save that now, we can see that we have 2,000 of 2,000 already. I think this is actually greater than. Let's make it greater than or equal. And we can see that it's met. But if I were to then add an expense, let's say I went out and partied one night, I spent $500 all of a sudden, and boom, my goal is no longer met. We can see that I now have 1,500 instead of, since we are simply doing a calculation between the income minus the expenses. I also went ahead and added filtering to my list variables. So now I can filter journal entries based on a specific field. So I can add a new filter and say that, yeah, I only want to count the daily hydration. For example, when I drink water. So if I save that and save this, I haven't actually drinking anything yet. So then if I were to drink 500 milliliters of water and I go into my goal, you can see that we have 500 of 1,000. If I were to drink wine instead, well, that does not count as water, so it's not added here. But let's say I do count wine. I could actually have then multiple values with a list filter. So I could instead switch this out to be a list. So what did you drink if it's either water or wine? And then I save this and I save this, and boom, all of a sudden we can see that this now updated since I included wine. And then of course, if I were to change this out in the journal entry, now let's say I drank coffee, I remember, oh, I didn't actually drink wine, it just tasted like wine, okay? If I save that now, we can see that this updates because it's no longer matching that filter that I set. We can of course also have multiple conditions for our goals. Let's say I have a healthy day goal. So the hydration should be greater than or equal to 1,000. The calories burned should be greater than 3,000. And we also want the daily step goal to be met. So now we can see that our hydration goal is clearly met, but our calories burned is not. So let's actually do some exercising. So now we can see that that goal is met as well. We simply don't have the daily steps. So let's just edit our daily steps for today and make it 10,000. Save that, and boom, it did not work because this is greater than. Let's make it greater than or equal, and boom, all of a sudden it's now met. So all of these conditions need to be met for this goal to be considered met. So how did I actually implement it in code? Well, everything is pretty much built around these variables that I talked about previously. So we have our variable graph, and we simply made these goals into variables as well. They simply work like a variable and calculate things. So we have our conditions stored inside of our goal variable type, and based on if it's a comparison goal condition or a goal met condition, we do different things. So for a comparison goal, well, then we actually evaluate the variables that we have specified. This can also be a constant, so we might have a number here, but we can evaluate it. So if we evaluate this value, well, if it's a constant, then we just return the value. Otherwise, we evaluate another variable. But the point here is that we have some dependencies. We actually depend on another variable. So whenever that variable updates value, we will also update the value of our goal variable. So that's how it's all connected. And in order to make this work with editing, we actually had to add another layer to this. So I actually added a variable edit provider. And this variable edit provider works in the way that it actually stores everything in memory. Every variable change, if I update a variable to contain a different field, for example, well, then that is only stored in memory, and it's only when we press the save button in the goal editor view that we actually save these changes to our database. So this is very important, because otherwise we would be making changes to the actual variables, then maybe the user pressed the discard button and all of a sudden all of the changes are gone. So we keep the variables stored in memory, and whenever we make a change, whenever we fetch a variable, well, then we first fetch it from the memory. We don't fetch it from the actual database. And then I also added an edit state provider, and this is for editing the variables. We need to have the values in the UI to be displayed. If we have a list variable, well, then we need all of the form questions so that the user can select between them. If they want to have another field, well, then they need to be able to see all of the fields. So based on that, we can, for example, fetch all of the forms. In case the user switches to another form, well, then we simply are able to render that immediately without having the user wait for it. And then for the comparison goal, well, we have a little edit constant or a variable. So we can actually edit a constant or a variable. And this is what allows me to have a nested view. I can have nested variables. I have a variable inside of another variable. When I press the edit button, well, then we just add that value to a stack. So we have a stack with these states on top of each other. And when we go back, we simply pop that and set it to the previous element in the stack. And this works then because we're storing the actual result in the variables themselves. We're using this variable edit provider to store the settings for a variable. So whenever I make a change here, well, then it will be persisted for our current update. When we press discard, all of that will be gone. But for this current update, we will have all of the settings stored inside of the variables themselves, so we can easily fetch them. Another thing that I also did this week was focus a little bit on the user interface and user experience. And one of the nicest things I found out is that we can actually disable that bouncy scroll effect that Android adds, because it looks horrible when we have a website that we have. So in order to do that, I actually just modified the main activity. And we can see here that we just set over scroll never. So this is the over scroll, the bouncy effect. But that really made it look much nicer on mobile. I also made the navigation bar look much nicer. So now we have a completely different layout from the desktop layout. If we can see here, we can see that we have this nice sidebar here, but here we have a bottom navigation bar that kind of resembles what you would see in a native Android app. I also spent some time this week trying to make these charts look nicer because they had a weird padding effect added by Chart.js, but now we can see that they're pretty much to the edge here. One of the side effects of this though is that we have to set a very thin border. I would actually like to have a 2-pixel border, but if I set that, then we will get back some of the padding, and I don't really want that. But now the charts look much nicer, and it's a very weird mix of options that you need to set for this to work in Chart.js, I must say. So if we go to the line chart, you see that we have to modify quite a lot of things. We have to set the point radius to be 0 because otherwise that adds a padding for some reason. And then we also have to set minus values for the padding here. Then we have to disable the grid. We have to disable the border. But it definitely looks much nicer than what we had previously. I'm sure we can probably tweak it a bit more to make it look even nicer. But it kind of resembles a chart at this point, right? So this was quite a slow week in general. I was kind of busy with other things in life this week, so I couldn't really spend that much time on this project. But I'm very happy that I got the goal system working now, and it's also pretty reactive. It could be better, but with this nested layout, I think it looks pretty nice on mobile as well. I think this is a pretty good compromise so that I don't have to write this UI twice, one for desktop and one for mobile. Now I have something that is kind of agnostic and can be used for both desktop and mobile. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I very much thank you for following along for yet another week of this project. I hope to see you next week as well. Also feel free to join my Discord channel if you want to be part of the community that I'm trying to build. But other than that, I'll see you guys next week. Peace out.